Good afternoon. I'm Kay Panovec, the Director of Communications for the West Ohio Conference of the United Methodist Church. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the Road to General Conference. This is our second town hall. We've had about 500 people, maybe 600 people actually, that have registered to learn more about General Conference. Just a little housekeeping. We are going to start with some opening comments from Bishop Palmer, and then we will get right to your questions. Good afternoon, Bishop Palmer.
Good afternoon, Kay, and thanks for all that you and your team have done to make this possible for us today in the West Ohio Conference. It's great to see you, Kay, and all of the people that we can't see, but thank you for tuning in. I'm still amazed when people show up and express their deep interest in Jesus Christ and in his church and in the United Methodist Church. As Kay has indicated, this is the second of two town halls. If it seems meet and right to do another one, we will, but we don't have one scheduled at this particular time. Thanks for your questions, and please know that of all the questions that have come in previously and today, or for today's town hall, our team led by Kay has grouped those questions together that have deep similarity so that, we try to give one response as best we can. And I want to use the word response, maybe a little nuanced from the word answer. So sometimes there's a hard, really clear answer. It's this way, this is the date, this is the road. And sometimes it's a response that includes some answer-like material, etc. I will say to you, I'll promise you that I'll distinguish between my responses or answers and when I choose to opine. So if I'm going to give you my opinion, it'll be clear. But if I am responding and answering a question, the fact that I might do it with some physical energy does not mean that it's not truthful or faithful. So that you don't have to look at me the whole time, and because leadership is shared, expertise is diffused throughout the life of our church. I've invited two colleagues that I also consider friends who are both General Conference delegates from the West Ohio Conference. The Reverend D. Stickley Minor, who is one of the executive staff members now at the General Board of Global Ministries of our church, and our friend and brother Bill Brownson, who is the CFO and administrative director here in the West Ohio Conference. Bill will pick up questions around denominational budget process and implications of finances, particularly in the light of disaffiliation. And I've asked Dee if she would address one of the huge body of proposals around regionalization that you're hearing, I assume, a lot of conversation about different angles of view, and there's more than one proposal. I asked Dee to do that because she has worked intimately with it as a member and the secretary of the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters. And full disclosure, I happen to also be a member of that team, and that is a committee of the General Conference. And but Dee has worked deeply with this and will help us get a picture of the regionalization proposal/proposals. Friends, no doubt you join me in being deeply concerned about people who lost their lives and whose lives have been disrupted with loss and grief, particularly of their homes and property. Because of the recent tornadoes that have come through. It hit Indiana and then came from the west through portions of Ohio, and particularly several of our counties. So thank you for your prayers, for your interest. The call has gone out for a number of ways you can respond. If you would refer to either the West Ohio Conference website page or to today's Newsnet, which is our conference e-letter that comes out every other week, there is wonderful detail. So thanks, Kay, and your team for getting that out. Thank you to the Reverend Karen Cook, the director of Connectional Ministries, under which disaster response falls, Mary Ellen Grace, who helps in that area, and our disaster response coordinator in this conference, Brother Tom Clinch. So thank you to all of you. I know there are myriads of of other people that are working to do that. And to our friend and brother, one of the superintendents, Dr. Jim Wilson, whose area got hit harder than others, who's been out visiting the sites and checking on pastors and local churches and households of lay and clergy people. Thank you to all of you. Would you join me in prayer? Gracious God, as we pause, it is against the backdrop of a recent disaster in our area. And we pray for all of the people whose lives have been disrupted, where there is loss and grief, both of human life and of material goods and memories. And we ask that you would send us on errands of mercy to come alongside those people with resources, material and spiritual and emotional, to lend a helping hand with the proverbial mucking out of things that follow a disaster like this, and to let them know that they are not alone, and that they are not alone in terms of our presence and participation with them, and that you never leave us nor forsake us. So make us wise and make us generous, make us compassionate, make us merciful and kind, especially when people face this kind of disruption in their lives. We thank you for all that's already happening and for all that will unfold. Thank you, oh God, for this technology that allows us to convene these town halls where we can sit in our offices, we can be in our homes, we might be on the treadmill or on a bicycle listening and or viewing this. So thank you for the opportunity to learn more about the United Methodist General Conference, and particularly the one that's coming up, to peer behind the curtain, so to speak, and to know some of the things about process and content that will be going on. Thank you for all of the folks who've tuned in, who will view this as a recording, and for all of the questions, and for our attempt at faithful, helpful, and meaningful responses. Bless us now and make us better because you are present in the power of your Holy Spirit than we would be otherwise. We ask this now in the name of the risen Christ, even Jesus of Nazareth. Amen. Kay, we're back to you.
All right, let's get started, Bishop. What is the timeline when local churches would be affected by General Conference actions? There could be changes in the language, new rules added, or even constitutional amendments. Can you explain what happens generally and when in each case?
Sure. That's a fabulous question. So a great deal of the legislation that comes in front of the General Conference takes effect, if it's adopted, as amended by the delegates on January 1 following the General Conference, except if the petition already specifies a different date, either a projected date beyond January 1 or an immediately upon adoption. So the petitioners, people who write petitions and resolutions, and the delegates have some discretion around that action. But the large body of it takes place when the new discipline goes into effect, which is typically January 1 following a general conference. Regarding constitutional amendments in particular, all constitutional amendments have to pass by 2/3 vote of the delegates, and also then they have to be ratified if they're passed by 2/3 of the delegates by the aggregate vote of the members of the annual conferences throughout the connection. So not just in the United States, but the United States annual conferences, Europe, the Philippines, and the annual conferences in Africa. And there are multiple annual conferences. And that takes some months for those votes to take place and for the numbers to be aggregated. And then, if anything that receives 2/3, both of the delegates and of the aggregate number of members of the annual conferences, respectively, then it is, quote, certified by the Council of Bishops, meaning that the process was followed, is legitimate, etc. And then those changes to the Constitution are in effect. So longer answer, but it can get a little nuanced along the way.
We have been bombarded with accusations for some time about significant numbers of international delegates not being able to attend General Conference, and even that the General Conference will be postponed again. Can you address these concerns?
Let me take them in reverse. I am not aware of any current conversations that indicate that the general conference that is scheduled for Charlotte, which by the way is the 2020 general conference being held in 2024 because of the postponements to which you referred that happened previously. So there is no active, vigorous conversation for it to be postponed. If it is, I'm unaware of it. I've not heard it in the Council of Bishops or with any other people related to the General Conference and its administration that I have interactions with. Secondly, the matter of delegates who have to travel from their home countries to another home country, in this case to the United States, to be physically present at the General Conference. My understanding is that some people have experienced delays in getting visas, and that's often because there is a backlog in the State Department and in the U.S. consulates around the world in the people that need visas to come into the United States getting an interview to get the visa to come. But right now, everything is on track. The General Conference is scheduled to begin on Tuesday, April 23rd. All of my energy is geared in that direction, and I plan to be there, and I think there will be the vast majority of delegates there. That's my learned opinion.
What are the major resolutions, disciplinary changes being considered at General Conference? Where can I find a list of and the full text of all resolutions, issues being considered at the General Conference?
So let me answer the where. The Daily Christian Advocate or the Advanced Daily Christian Advocate, I would ask that any one of you to go to Daily Christian Advocate, all is one word, .org. And you can find availability of all of the material, including resolutions and petitions that came when the gate was reopened for petitions and resolutions because of the postponements. Some of us prior to 2020 received 3 volumes. I've got 2 of them here. These are massive. Almost 1,000 pages in each. And then volume 3 has come out, and it's electronic now only. And so I've got another almost 1,000 pages here. So that's all the stuff that came in following the postponements and the gate being reopened by the Secretary of the General Conference. The first thing you should do is avail yourself of those. You can buy copies of these if you go to Daily Christian Advocate, one word, .org, and you can download them, etc., onto your electronic document, however you want to read the material. Now, the other thing I'd like to invite you to do, which is not a part of the question, is that you'd pray for the delegates. That is I'm only holding up one of 4 books. That's a heaven of a lot of material to go through. And the previous General Conference said that every petition had to be addressed by the General Conference in some way, shape, or form. Of course, people do work in the committees of the General Conference. So pray for our delegates as they are poring over this material, that they will, first of all, know what's there, and then be led in conversation, etc., and the Holy Spirit to know how best to vote. So I hope that helps you.
Will there be a way after next General Conference for a church to disaffiliate?
I have 2 answers. Answer A is, I don't know. And answer B is, there have always been ways for United Methodist congregations to disconnect from the United Methodist Church. I think the question certainly implies, will there be other opportunities around something like what was paragraph 2553, which is now defunct, meaning it died on at midnight on January 1st of this year because the General Conference delegates put a sunset into the petition, and that's what was voted favorably by a slim majority at the 2019 special session. So there have always been ways for churches, whether or not there'll be a way that is either the same exactly or terribly similar to 2553, I don't know. There are petitions to that effect. That is up to the delegates, the 860 some delegates to the General Conference, to make that decision. The other paragraphs that already exist in the discipline have a different focus than what 2553 did. And for example, they begin with most of two of them, especially with the consent or the permission of the bishop. And we've had churches along the way, one or two at a time, maybe every other year, that have come to the end of their lifespan as United Methodists and have used those paragraphs. But I will say in my administration over now 24 years, I've used them sparingly and not given my consent to that very often unless there were terribly substantive reasons.
Bishop, I just want to put in a little extra information that the Advanced Daily Christian Advocate is also available on our website at westohioumc.org. It is digital, so for those of you who want to see it in that form, it is available on our website. So moving on to the next, you're welcome. Moving on to the next question. Doesn't being a reconciled ministry and making that public help let people from the LGBTQ community feel sure that they will be welcomed into our church?
Sure. I assume that a church that takes on any moniker such as reconciling ministry hopes that that's the message they're sending and that is the message that is received by a broader public. And my observation is that is true in many, 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 many of the cases. I also know that there are congregations that have not chosen to enter the so-called reconciling congregation process that are reputationally open and welcoming in their communities, and that is known because most sense of whether a church is warm and welcoming to all people travels by word of mouth. It's reputation, in the same way in which people talk about a good experience they've had with any other institution, etc. And at the end of the day, on being welcoming to all persons, whether gay or lesbian or something that represents difference from what the majority of a congregation might be, it is that person who wonders if they're welcome. They determine how welcome they feel. So my saying, welcome to my home, and then, having you in for dinner, but I don't talk to you, I'm not kind, you can't wait for it to be over, you determine if it was a hospitable experience. So welcome is often determined by the individual who is receiving hospitality and welcome at the end of the day.
What is the United Methodist Church doing to combat anti-Semitism?
We have very articulate positions, both in the Book of Discipline and the Book of Resolutions, around anti-Semitism, and I would say by extension around hate against anyone based upon race, ethnicity, national origin, gender, etc. So our positioning is standing against all hateful speech and action and what may be classified by the judicial system as hate crimes. In particular communities, people and regions, people are doing probably more that is visible than all of us can see at any one time. But I urge all of you to stand against hateful speech and hateful actions against anyone, but particularly because of their identity, such as anti-Semitism, but not limit yourself to that. If there are other groups or classifications of persons that are experiencing both personal and systemic hate.
There seems to be a lot of misinformation out there, especially on social media, regarding General Conference and the United Methodist Church in general. How do people tell what is accurate and what isn't?
Mm. I would say the way to determine if you're getting the the real content that will help you in your own discernment and thinking and knowledge is to know that you're using trusted sources. So this may be a blowing of the horn from the home team, but I would use United Methodist resources, umc.org, the conference website, and I would say every conference website with which I'm familiar tries to put out that which is truthful. And if there is a counterbalancing opinion, they identify it as an opinion, but they say this is factual. Secondly, take responsibility. You've actually got to read. So now I'm about to opine. I told you I would. If you get all of your sourcing from your caucuses, you with me? And I've belonged to and still belong to a caucus group or two related to the United Methodist Church. And you choose to read what they send you by email and in snail mail, and you don't do any research of your own, just think back to when you first learned how to do a term paper in high school, and your teacher made the distinction between primary sources and secondary sources. So here's the good news, friend. I'm out of opining, I'm back to fact. The book of discipline, the book of resolutions are all open source. You can actually own one. You can read it for yourself. You can engage in conversation with others. I'm not saying that there might not be different opinions about how you apply things, but I'm saying it's open source. Nobody's hiding it from anyone. Third thing, and I'll quit with this, but I said read, and then I said inquire, and then I would say listen. So read, inquire, listen.
Beautiful. We are moving to issues and proposals. And so Dee, we're about ready for you. Please explain regionalization.
Thank you, Kay. I am going to share my screen if that's okay. And this should be the PowerPoint. Does everybody see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So what I'm going to be doing is presenting some the petitions that were created by the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters on Worldwide Regionalization. And it was done in partnership and collaboration with the Christmas Covenant team and the Connectional Table. Everything is grounded in our mission statement, which is in the Book of Discipline. I think most of us know that, the mission of the United Methodist Church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And we say that local churches and extension ministries are the best places for that to happen. And so the church looks different all around the world and in different places. And so one of the things about regionalization is that it's being able to see our whole church. Oftentimes we're familiar with what we know. And so this is a map that shows membership from 2016 data from GCFA, the different places in the world where we are. So that just kind of gives you a glimpse. And so when we talk about regionalization, one of the things is that it really is not something new. In working with Bishop Patrick Strife, who is a staunch church historian and brilliant, he helped to uncover some of the history. So going back to the 1800s, right, the predecessor, the United Methodist Church, began to have conversation about, man, what does it look like for us to be in ministry in our context and in other contexts in ways that allow each to be who they are. And, when we go to 1924, where there's some, proposals that the U.S. would become a central conference, and it was defeated. And throughout our history, there was moments where petitions were brought to General Conference that would begin to shift how we began to organize ourselves. And most recently, in 2000, there was a petition that was submitted that actually would require that no region of the United Methodist Church would be able to have more than 50% of delegates, and it was defeated. And so part of this dance around regionalization, we have to be able to understand that the United Methodist Church was started in the United States with then missions around the world. And as our mission became successful, right, it's like the populations grew, the members grew. And so what does it mean to be able to be present in different places in the world? And in many times, I think we just need to be honest with ourselves. It was hard to give up power for the church in the United States. And currently, we are the only area of the world where the only place to attend to our specific matters, like our pension, the United Methodist Senate, all the resolutions, the only place that can happen is at General Conference. And so everybody around the world has to learn about the United States. And so in 2008, that was the most recent time we're at General Conference. There were constitutional changes made that passed that would change all central conferences to regional conferences, and we create the United States as a regional conference, but it wasn't ratified by the annual conferences. And a part of the reason was people weren't quite sure what that meant. And so there is a lot that has happened since 2000. And if you all remember, after the special conference in 2019, there was a lot of movements with proposals around the separation of the United Methodist Church. And so there was a group of lay and clergy leaders from outside of the United States and our central conferences who said, we want our voice to come into the mix. And they formed what is called the Christmas Covenant. And I think it's worth just quoting that they wrote regionalized legislation that was inspired by a vision of a church that connects globally, engages in mission together, respects contextual ministry settings, celebrates the diversity of God's creation in its many beautiful expressions, and values mutuality that empowers relationships in order to strengthen our core mission of evangelism, discipleship, and social witness for the transformation of the world. And so those petitions were voted on, and they became a part of the legislation submitted to the original 2020 General Conference. Since 2020, we know a lot has happened. And so there was, back in early 2023, the Standing Committee was approached to see if we'd be willing to work with both the Connectional Table and Christmas Covenant to look at those original petitions and how can we update them with everything that has shifted. And so what we did is that we came up with a set of 8 petitions. They're called the Worldwide Regionalization Legislation. If you look at the QR code, you can take a picture of that, and that will take you to a United Methodist News Service article about what these petitions are. And we've continued to work and collaborate together across the 3 groups going into General Conference. And so these are some of the values that informed all of these petitions, and I really want to focus on a couple of them. When we listen to our leaders and members in our central conferences, they approach this in a very different way. And for them, they want to be seen as being equal members of the United Methodist Church with equal voice, with equal leadership, without having to be under the weight of the Church of the United States, because we've always been a US-oriented denomination. And so regionalization is a way for them to really develop their voice and to contextualize their ministries so that it reflects their culture. And I think one of the other things that's really important around the values is that it really does maintain our Wesleyan theological doctrine and identity. That doesn't change. It's regionalization and being connected still grounded in the same theological doctrine. And it's about, how does everything not just go through the United States? And so what it does is it would create 8 regional conferences. And so it is the current central conferences of the United Methodist Church, then plus the United States. So it would create those 8 regions, and each region would be able to maximize the effectiveness of their ministry by adapting parts of the discipline, not all of it, to their context. And so it would give each region equal authority to legislate and create rules and regulations that fit their context. And so some of the things that the Constitution would do is it would give regions the ability to set the education and other qualifications for clergy and specialized lay ministers, which really is bringing our Constitution in line with what already happens. It would allow each region to publish a regional hymnal with adapted rituals that align with their culture and the laws of their land. And it would give regions the ability to adapt chargeable offenses and their penalties because our system is aligned with the United States system, and the way we do things aren't always legal in other legal contexts in countries. What it doesn't do is we still have a general conference, we still have judicial council, a council of bishops, our general boards and agencies. We all share the same constitution. All of the rest of the book of discipline is in play, except for some parts of part 6 of the book of discipline, which would be adaptable. So the Constitution kind of like frames what those are. The purpose is to really help focus on mission and ministry so that, the regions can adapt to their culture and their context. And it would allow the general conference to really focus on, our mutuality in mission and ministry and how we can impact the world. And it would allow each region to bring their unique voice and perspective. So we really hear and honor each other. Because we are still connected through our same doctrinal practices and social principles, we're still deeply connected. This isn't about autonomy. There's a difference between regionalization and autonomy. And the hope, particularly when you listen to our leaders in our central conferences, is that their gifts will actually be seen and be able to heard and to be able to be activated across the connection and not just in their areas. An important thing is that no region would be able to impose their rules on another region. And so, if one of the central conferences in Africa, made some rules around polygamy, they wouldn't be able to, enforce that on other places in Africa or anywhere else in the world. One of the biggest things is it decenters the United States. Again, if we listen to our friends and siblings from central conferences, they actually oftentimes wonder if who they are in their context matters, because about 2/3 to 3/4 of our legislation is really grounded in the United States. And so there's 8 of our petitions. I'm just going to run through what they do. The first petition really is all of the constitutional changes. I've got the page numbers here on the Advanced Daily Christian Advocate. Petition number 2 then takes the rest of the book of discipline and changes the language to align with the proposed changes in the Constitution. And then the third petition, it really is an enabling legislation that would allow the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters to change its name to the Standing Committee on Regional Conference Matters outside the United States. Petition 4 is actually its enabling petition so that anywhere in the book of discipline, it would change the word central conference to regional conference. The 5th petition would create a new paragraph 507, that would develop an interim U.S. regional committee. This would then be a legislative body at general conference to which U.S. matters would be assigned. Any decisions that's made in that committee would have to be affirmed by general conference. It's an interim thing until a regional conference could be established. The sixth one, then, because we are Methodist, there has to be a non-disciplinary petition that really sets up the process of how you establish that regional committee. And then the seventh one, it's a non-disciplinary petition that creates the plan for developing the U.S. as a regional conference. These non-disciplinary petitions can sound really technical, but it's because we have to be able to spell out the process to establish these, because there's nowhere natural that would allow its establishment. The eighth petition is a non-disciplinary petition that would empower the standing committee, the connectional table, and partners they would like to bring to the table to really look at, so how are we doing implementing regionalization, and what are some ways that we want to perfect it? Because not one piece of legislation can be perfect. And then they would bring the recommendations to the next general conference. If you want to see at high level what the constitutional amendments do, just scan this QR code. It just takes you to a place that really just kind of like bullet points those out. So I want to talk a little bit about petition number 8, because in a worldwide group of leaders, there's a lot of competing values. And so this one really takes seriously where there were some compromises in give and take. So this is the study group, and there's some specific things that would do is, one, it would look at whether jurisdictional conferences should be extended across all regions, and if jurisdictional conferences should indeed remain in the United States. Didn't feel like we were at a point where we can make those decisions with the time frame we had. The other thing is, as regions make adaptations and we begin to learn how to trust each other, there's going to be conflicts that arise because we're not going to understand why a region is making an adaptation. And so what would it look like to be able to develop an arbitration and mediation process so everything doesn't have to just go through Judicial Council? So we can really bring people to the table, have conversations, and begin to really deepen that sense of trust and respect. And it would also look at other questions of equity within a worldwide church. And so again, just the way the ratification process works, the constitutional amendments would need 2/3 of delegates at General Conference. That is petition number 1. All of the rest of the petitions outside of the creation of the U.S. as a regional legislative committee, if the constitutional amendments do not pass or ratified, then the rest of the petitions, if they were to pass, would not go into effect. So all of the rest of the petitions are dependent on the ratification. And so we do the action at General Conference, so the rest of the Book of Discipline is in place and the processes are in place to implement. But if it's not ratified, then they don't go into effect, because petitions 2 through 8 only need a majority vote. Once the annual conferences have their votes on ratification, all those votes are submitted to the Council of Bishops, who certifies their votes. And then should they pass, then they take effect immediately. Would like to close with a quote from a bishop we know very well, Bishop Monde Myombo of the North Katanga Annual Conference. He said that no region can claim to be the center and the other's periphery. Jesus Christ remains the center of God's mission. And that really is our hope, is as we move into regionalization, we in the United States will learn what it means to be equal partners with each other, instead of trying to dictate what happens, instead of trying to control and lead. And then it allows, our siblings around the world to be able to establish who they are, and we can really begin to be in that, live into that mutuality.
Thank you, Dee. That was very helpful. We appreciate it so much. You've made it a little bit easier for those of us who might not have all the experience that you do. We're grateful for your leadership. Thank you so much. Bishop, we're going to turn some of these questions back to you again. We're now moving into the topic of human sexuality and misinformation again. What are the likely agenda items, proposals for the General Conference, changes in the discipline regarding LGBT folks specifically?
Sure, thanks. And let me add my thanks to for what you've done for us and for making the slide deck available. For 50 years, there have been lots of proposals around human sexuality and particularly around gay and lesbian persons in the life of the church. And there are petitions that are directed at removing what is referred to as harmful and or restrictive language about who can serve in the life of the church. In a practical sense, all of us no doubt know of people who are members of congregations, lay people that are openly gay or lesbian. And the primary controversy for us over these more recent years has been around, can you be ordained as a clergy person if you're openly gay or lesbian? Can United Methodist clergy perform services of marriage, preside at those for same-gendered persons, etc. So there are petitions that in front of the General Conference delegates that would make that possible. In some cases, there are petitions that would simply remove the restriction around both participation or that kind of leadership. And there are a body of petitions that would say, let's leave it the way it is now. So those would be the primary buckets in which I've seen the questions or the petitions, or resolutions that will be in front of the delegates. And again, those 860 folks will have to conference, collaborate, pray, and reach a conclusion around that.
Is there a plan to change the discipline definition of marriage from a union between one man and one woman to two people?
Let me say there is no such plan. There are petitions that would change the language that says a marriage is between two adult persons. But there is no plan. It's people, groups, individuals, ideas that come forth in petitions and resolutions, and that's what the delegates have to sort out and make a decision about.
Will more liberal leadership be sent to moderate and conservative churches?
That's an interesting question, and it's probably the answer is quote unquote unknown. But there is no organized effort to do that I'm aware of. So let me speak in a first person context about how I try to do appointment making. This one will be a little snarky, but truthful. I don't go out of my way to get pen pals that I don't already have. So that's the snarky part. So I think you can laugh at that. The second thing is, I want every appointment of a clergy person to be the pastor of a congregation or to serve on the staff of that congregation if it is an appointment. I want that to be effective and a fruitful match so that the mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world is what's at the heart of that congregation's life and is what is at the heart of the leadership of that particular person who may be appointed to a congregation. Thirdly, I do not believe we have a shared definition in the culture or in the United Methodist Church of what conservative or liberal means. It depends on the subject matter. Fourthly, I know I'm going rapid fire, I have never presumed that when I stood up to preach or practiced my ministry, that everybody agreed when they heard me with every jot and tittle. What we come together around is our agreement that at the heart and the center of the life of the church is the risen Lord Jesus Christ. We agree on certain minimum bar doctrinal standards that should be shaping our lives. Here's the fifth thing. I believe that in what I call good shepherds. And so I often ask, it's not as though myself and the cabinet do not pay attention to, this person has a hugely liberal profile. Just look at their postings and their writings. And this church has some notable conservative bent. But it doesn't mean that we won't entertain it. We have pastors in this conference, and it's true in every conference that I know of, that are what I call good shepherds. and they can be a good pastoral leader to people in a congregation where they may not vote in the same way that some of the people in the congregation may vote. So it begins with, if a pastor actually loves and likes people, that would be a good start, and that a pastor and a congregation together love Jesus Christ, and they surrender to serving him, following him. And thirdly, if they believe the mission of the church is to serve not just the church members, but to serve the communities and to serve the world. I have pastored people that are more liberal and more conservative than I am. And by the way, if you happen to be a bishop or a general superintendent in our church, if you've got a conference of 100,000 plus people, there are people that, let me just use the linear view, that will be to your left and to your right. The question is, can you hold the whole? Those are the questions that I ask. But there is no organized conspiracy by this bishop and this cabinet or any bishop I know. We have to only serve. Now, let me give you one other nuance. As long as the United Methodist Church has what is called guaranteed appointment for the full members of the annual conference, every clergy person in good standing has to go somewhere, and every local church deserves to receive a pastor. Just a notation, not an opinion.
Thank you, Bishop. This has to do with ordination. Is it the intention of bishops to only ordain liberal-leaning new clergy and force this change on the churches in the United States?
It is absolutely not the leaning of this bishop or any bishops I know to only ordain all people that all walk in a line like a row of ducks, theologically and ideologically. That's my image that I'm choosing to use to respond to this question. That absolutely is not the case. No church will be a whole church if there is not some diversity of opinion. Now, by diversity of opinion, I don't necessarily mean always clashing opposites. What I mean is angles of view about the work and nature of the triune God, and therefore the work and nature of the church. And don't forget what I said just a couple minutes ago. We do not have shared definitions of so-called liberal, progressive, or of conservative, or for that matter, in the middle and moderate. So if we want to get into those questions with some actual depth and substance, then maybe the church needs to spend its time on coming up with some shared definition of those terms. But I would rather use my time helping to organize, mobilize, and motivate the church to be in Logan County to clean up in the name of Jesus and to come alongside people whose lives have been disrupted by disaster. I want to spend my time in my movement around, and I want every United Methodist Christian to spend our time on the mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And let's stop transporting and transferring sometimes into the church definitions of liberality or conservatism that we're actually picking up from our news sources. At the heart is Jesus, period, hard stop.
We have two more questions on this topic. Will the United Methodist Church be more respectful of the various views in all regions, striving to have churches that reflect the true diversity within the United States, or will we be forced to leave?
No one will be forced to leave, period, hard stop, an unambiguous response. I hope we will always have churches that reflect some theological diversity in worship style. How do you tell, is a church liberal or conservative because they sing Bach and Beethoven or Gabriel Fauré, or are they liberal or conservative because they're using music by Richard Smallwood or C.C. Winans? I mean, what are our lenses for that? However, we are not fully a church in the broad and aggregate sense if the praise of God cannot be uttered in multiple styles both language, of music, and of liturgy relevant to the community and reflective of the triune God. So no churches will ever be forced to leave. I cannot imagine that day. And our tolerance for all kinds of churches is pretty well proven as a United Methodist Church. There are people who say to me, Bishop, why do you put up with, and then you fill in the blank? Because we need one another. We are sharpened and refined by one another. And the world is, this is pedestrian, but terribly dull if my lenses and my cultural skew on things are the only angle of view. So again, it's not necessarily clashing opposites, it's angles of view so that we might tease out the depth and the breadth of God's love for each one of us and for all of us.
Why don't bishops and pastors follow the discipline, especially in the context of same-sex unions and openly gay bishops?
In my judgment, our bishops and pastors, almost without exception, are following the discipline in that regard. And if people have a concern that a particular bishop or a particular pastor or not, I point them to the Book of Polity. There is, as a resource for how, from their point of view, that might be remedied, but they have to exercise it.
Thank you, Bishop. We're going to turn our questions now to financial matters. So, Bill, are you with us? Excellent.
I am.
Excellent. Thank you. So, Bill, can you tell us a little bit about how our apportioned money is allocated?
Sure. As you know, in the West Ohio Conference, we heretofore have had three funds. We have funds that support the general church, the districts now in the aggregate, and the annual conference. The general church, and this is a town hall regarded that, so I'm going to focus on that. The general church's apportionments are derived from how much every local church in the jurisdictions, in our case, incur in expenses. If you've ever been part of a church or part of an exercise where you're completing statistical tables, guess what? That's the beginning of how the general church determines the amount of funds, the amount of apportionment it will send to an annual conference.
Thank you. How are the finances of the United Methodist Church affected by disaffiliation? For example, on the conference level, district staffing, number of bishops, etc.
Sure. So what's important to remember here is that there are two things afoot. If you have read, and as Bishop Palmer said earlier, multiple sources, you will read that the general church budget is decreasing by around 50%. That's the apportionment budget. So every time you hear general church budget, think amount of apportionments. And that 50% reduction is really the combination of two things. It's really about 49% in the aggregate, but it's less for some, more for others. Disaffiliations are accountable for 27% of that reduction, keeping in mind that the amount the general church apportions is a percentage of, and it will be just under 2.6% in the next quadrennium if the budget going to general conference passes, 2.6% of all of the churches in West Ohio that were in service as of January 1 of this year, based on their 2022 statistics. So we got rid of all the churches that disaffiliated, and we said 2.6% of their net expenditures from 2022. That's 27%. But also, as Bishop Palmer reminded us, this is the 2020 General Conference being held now in 2024. And the legislation going to the 2020 General Conference already contemplated that there would be a 20% or so reduction in that rate. So the general church reduction is a function or a combination of disaffiliations and a planned rate reduction from what is currently about 3.29% of expenses to 2.6% of expenses. One other thing just to remind us in our thinking about budgets, just like in the local church, hopefully there are sources of funds other than what you get in collections. Similarly, at the general church level, the budget that we'll be talking about is the apportionment budget. Some of our agencies have other sources of income. They have significant investments and they're relying on their investments to supplement their work. Other funds do not have investments and they are passed through. And what they get is what's been collected from apportionments, period, hard stop. So in the conference budget, we've been putting forward what I refer to as an all sources budget. We do our very best to show all the spending we intend or expect to incur and from what sources we will use to cover those expenses. And apportionments are indeed important. And in fact, when you get to annual conference, you'll see that about 66% of the anticipated expenses in the 2025 budget are likely to come from apportionments and the other third from other sources.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bill. Friends, that concludes the questions that we have had submitted to us. And I see that we're very close to the time limit. We wanted to be true to that 1 hour time because some of you are watching during your lunch hour. We so appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Bishop, we have one last question for you, and that is, what is your prayer for the General Conference this year?
My prayer is that the General Conference would help the whole church to be sure to be on mission. And that mission is making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world.
Thank you, Bishop. And thank you, friends, for joining us.
Thank you, Kay, and to all of the rest of you. Bill and Dee, we couldn't have done it without you. And may I invite us to a time of prayer now. This prayer is from William Temple. While we deliberate, God reigns. When we decide wisely, God reigns. When we decide foolishly, God reigns. When we serve God in humble loyalty, God reigns. When we serve God self-assertively, God reigns. When we rebel and seek to withhold our service, God reigns. God, the Alpha and the Omega, which is and which was and which is to come, the Almighty. Gracious God, may you continue to reign in our church and in our lives. Amen.
Amen.